I'm planning this out because it's easier. Job 1 and 2 is easier to plot out. It's narrative. It's just easier to follow. But as we get into the rest of the book, it's going to be fun. We don't want this to extend for 5 years. But it's not going to be a couple weeks either. So pray for me as we try to plot this out. Let's go ahead and read Job chapter 1. And Bernard, I'm sorry, we're already good. All right. Job chapter 1, and we're just going to look tonight down to the end of verse 5. But let's read all the way down to verse 12. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. Verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. As I said, we are looking at verses 1 to 5. And in those 5 verses, the author highlights 2 things. He's focusing on 2 things. First, Job's wealth, and next, his piety. The author is telling us about Job's wealth and his goodness. And this is crucial for our understanding of the book. The author really spends a lot of time and is passionate that we understand what Job lost and that we understand his character. I also think that Job, though, is held up as an example to us. He's presented almost as an ideal man. We know that Job is not sinless. We're actually going to see this later. He's not a sinless person. But the book presents Job as a very unique individual. So let's go ahead and look at Job's character and his wealth, okay? First off, where is Job from? Uz, okay? I always have to say this, but not Oz. There's no Yellow Brick Road here in this story. He's from the land of Uz. And we're not really 100% sure where Uz was located. But again, this is not the land of promise. Job was not a Hebrew. He's not a descendant of Abraham. In Lamentations 4:1, Jeremiah says, "Rejoice and be glad, O daughters of Edom, you who dwell in the land of Uz." Edom, we know, is southeast of the Dead Sea. This means he was not an Israelite. This means Job shows to have no knowledge of the covenant between Yahweh and Abraham's offspring. So, he is not in the promised land. We believe, if you remember last week, we said that Job probably lived after Noah and before Moses. That's as specific as we can be. So he did not live in the land of promise. He was not a Hebrew. That's quite significant when you look at the Old Testament. The vast majority of people in the Old Testament, the characters of the Old Testament, they are children of Abraham. But we know, that he is not an Israelite. His name, what does Job mean? It means, some say that it means, where is my father, or possibly no father. Now, this has led some to speculate that Job had been an orphan. Now, we don't know that. Also, the fact that there is no lineage given of him has led to some to say this, but we just don't really know. We don't know his background. We don't know where he's necessarily from. But we do know certain things about Job. First, we know of his piety. Look at verse 1 again. There was a man whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. What an amazing testimony. There are three things that are really brought out about Job. First, he was blameless and upright. Second, he feared God. And third, he turned away from evil. It's amazing how these things are related. We've learned about his name. We've learned kind of where he lived. But the first real description about him is his character. This is the first thing that the author brings out. What does it mean to be blameless and upright? Blameless, or as the King James says, perfect. Well, of course, he's not saying Job was without sin. So what does it mean that he was blameless? First, it doesn't mean, like I said, that he was without sin. He was a sinner. All men are sinners. One commentator says blameless or being upright refers to the absence of certain observable sinful acts. In other words, by all accounts, Job was a good man. As we see, he's going to prove himself to be a very good father. He's going to prove himself to be a good husband. He was good to his servants. He kept his word. In all his ways, he would strive for holiness. Now, blamelessness, being blameless, is a core feature or theme of Job. Christopher Ashe rightly observes that the character trait of blamelessness or integrity is pivotal in this book. Turn to Job chapter 8. Job chapter 8, we're going to look at verse 20. Okay, this is Bildad talking. This is one of Job's friends. Bildad says, "Behold, God will not reject a blameless man, nor take the hand of evildoers." This is what Bildad said to Job. He's insisting, Bildad, he insists that the reason why Job is suffering is that Job must have done something wrong. In other words, that Job was not blameless. But we can go to chapter 9, 20 to 22. I'm not going to read it right now. But 3 times, Job replies and states that he is blameless. Job is not lying. He's not hiding sin. Because God is allowing Satan to test Job, and not because Job had done anything wrong. He's not judging Job. He was blameless. Being blameless is a key theme throughout this book. Now, go back to Job chapter 1. So we see that he was blameless and upright. Kind of the same idea there. Why? What caused Job to be blameless and upright? Read verse 1 and tell me what you think. He feared God. What does it mean to fear God? Reverence. You know, sometimes Christians are criticized for preaching that one should fear God, like we should be scared of God is kind of the idea there. And that's not really what's happening. Having a fear of God does not necessarily refer to being frightened or scared of God, although I will say that there is an element where we should have that kind of idea of God. So what does it mean to have a fear of God? Well, as has already been stated, it refers to being in awe of God, a reverential awe. And this is why Job turned away from evil. This is why Job was blameless and upright. He feared God. I know a guy who was in the special forces. Those guys blow me away. Most of them speak multiple languages. This guy I know he could kill a guy in 10 different ways. Okay? Always good to know. He knows how to use any weapon. He's incredibly fit. And when I'm around this guy or people like him, I'm in awe of him. And this illustration came to mind as I studied what it means to fear God. It's an amazement. It's being amazed at His greatness. It's having a reverence for Him. I don't know if that's the greatest illustration. Another one came to mind. I remember I was traveling back home from Wichita, Kansas. And we lived, I think, if I recall, 2.5, 3 hours away from Wichita. This was late one Sunday night. And I was preaching at a church, did their Sunday evening service, and driving back. And as I was driving back, terrible thunderstorms were sweeping through Kansas. Just horrible thunderstorms. And the weather I encountered that night amazed me. First time I ever really saw a tornado. It was in the distance, but I could see the funnel cloud. I couldn't make it home that night. So I called my wife, said, honey, I have to stay at a hotel. I cannot get home that night. So I got a hotel. And I remember walking, the rain was just, I couldn't see past my bumper. I finally pulled into this place. I said, okay, here I go. And I made a run for it. And the wind was something I had never experienced before. And as I finally got into the doorway of the hotel, I looked outside at the spectacle in absolute awe of the power I was witnessing. Now, when I saw this, what do you think was my response? What do you think was my response? As I saw the lightning strike, as I saw the trees uprooted and a flash flood, what do you think was the appropriate response to such power and might? Fear, respect, and a change of how I acted. I had to respond to it. As I witnessed the power of nature, I automatically understood my weakness in comparison to it. I knew I was no match for its power. I was aware that I needed shelter and protection. My awe produced an appropriate response. Do you remember Isaiah before seeing into the throne room of heaven? Go to Isaiah 6. Hold your place here. Isaiah 6. Look at verse 1. In the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, with 2 he flew. and one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory, and the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. I mean, what a spectacle. He is granted a vision into heaven. Some people speculate that Isaiah was somehow related to the kings, perhaps even Uzziah. Some speculate that he may have even been in the court and seen Uzziah. If that's true or not, we don't really know. However, he is now seeing into the throne room. He is seeing God and seeing and hearing the seraphim. The message is causing the whole place to shake. The house was filled with smoke. What was Isaiah's response? Look at verse 5. Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Why? For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Here's the point. When we understand God, we can never fully understand him, but when we get a deeper glimpse of him, when we see and understand who he is, that will cause a response in us. So we can't separate Job being blameless and upright from his fear of God. Also, because he feared God, he did something else. What happened? He turned away from evil. Why did he turn away from evil? The answer is obvious. He feared God. He was in awe of God. He lived with the understanding of God's holiness and power. And a true fear or awe of God will always lead to obedience and striving for holiness. I don't know if you're here tonight and you're struggling with a particular sin. Maybe there's something in your life that you're just really struggling to obey God. What is it that we need to do? You know, so often when I counsel people, I'm saying, listen, in order to win in any game, there has to be both defense and offense. In other words, defense, if you're doing something that is sinful, you need to stop. We need to say, okay, if you're watching this, we need to somehow get you to stop. We need to change how that happens. But playing just defense does not win the game. We need to go on the offense. It's not just saying no, it's actually learning more of our God. The more we see God, the more we understand who he is, the more we understand his holiness, the more we're going to say, woe is me. And after Isaiah said, woe is me, I'm undone, what else did he say? Here am I, Lord, send me. There's service. A true fear or awe of God will always lead to obedience and striving for holiness. When we see God for who he is, we automatically will see how we don't measure up. If you want to be like Job, if you want to be a man who's blameless and upright and turning away from evil, then there must be a true fear of God. So the author, he begins by revealing Job's piety. We're going to revisit this in a little bit. But now, the author, he really tries to show other things about Job. We learn about his family. He's highlighting Job's wealth and greatness, his success. We understand in verse 2, there were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. This is kind of the ideal family at this point. 7 sons, 3 daughters, 10 children. One commentator says this would be the ideal family. Sons were highly prized and would have been executives in Job's empire. But we also understand his greatness, or we see his greatness. Now, as we read about Job's wealth, this can kind of just go over our heads here in 2021. Look at this, okay? He possessed 7,000 sheep. Think about that for a second. 7,000 sheep. What do you know about sheep? They go everywhere, right? I've always heard that sheep need to be moved. Can't stay in the same pasture. Why? They eat it all and cause erosion. Think of the amount of pasture land this man must have had to support 7,000 sheep. Now look at this. Okay, so he had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels. What good is a camel? What's that? Transporting things. He had a trade empire. I mean, think of the 3,000 camels and what he was doing. He was involved in trade somehow. You know, whenever I think of the Middle East, I think of those guys, you know, on the camels, bringing spices and all this stuff around. That's probably exactly what he's doing. Not only 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. What's a yoke? 2, okay, so 1,000 oxen. What were oxen for? Well, when you say yoke, they're being they're a team, right? In order to plant. Think of how many crops, how many fields could be plowed with 500 yoke of oxen. And then he says 500 female donkeys for labor and very many servants. This was an incredibly wealthy guy. I mean, huge amounts of wealth. I'm not going to try to compare him to, you know, a Buffett or a Gates or whatever. I don't know how much but I'm sure, I mean, they actually say here in Job that he was the greatest of all the people of the East. This man had so much wealth. This man had so much power. We think that he was living before, you know, the times of so many kings in the area, kind of more of a clan type situation. This must have been a huge one. 10 sons, 3 daughters. All of this wealth, all of these servants. He had vast herds, each requiring vast portions of land and different types of land. One commentator says Job was probably more of a chief of a large tribe, and he was the greatest of all the people of the East. He was one of the richest men who lived at that time. Let me ask you, why was Job so wealthy? Why do you think he was so wealthy? Blessed by the Lord. Isn't that what we read later when Satan, he's saying, listen, the only reason why Job is serving you is because you've blessed him. So, we understand that he was very wealthy. But in verse 4, we revisit again his piety. We get a glimpse of how this man operated. Let's read verses 4 to 5. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. We need to be careful there, not reading into verse 4. I've actually heard people say that this was a party scene, that this was a debauched type of feasting. I don't think so. It's not portrayed as a sinful act. Verse 5, and when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. So he's actually coming to them after these parties and offering sacrifices. And I think that's why some people believe that these were not good parties. But that's really not what's going on there. Job would regularly offer sacrifices for his children. Again, how many sons? How many daughters? 3, okay. Verse 4 shows that each son had their own home. Also, no husbands are mentioned for the daughters, so some would wonder if they're still young. We don't know, but perhaps they're shows that maybe Job is not as old as some of us visualize. We don't really know. But his sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day. Again, some may be tempted to think these boys were partying. I mean, their dad's really rich, right? And isn't this what rich kids do? There were 7 of them. Did they each have a day where they had a party at their house? Some say, well, there's 7 sons, so each guy has his own party day, right, of the week. Not really what's going on. See, the phrase, on his day, most scholars that I read believe potentially refers to their birthday. So on their birthday, the brothers would invite the entire family, their other brothers, to come, and they would be celebrating for a period of days. Even the sisters would come, and there would be feasting and drinking. So 10 sons. There's 10 birthdays every year, right? 7 sons. 10 kids total. But look what happens. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. Once the celebration was over, Job sent for each of his children to consecrate them. Another word could be to purify or to sanctify them. He understood that his children potentially could have sinned greatly, even cursing God in their hearts. So Job regularly confronted his family with their sin before God and nudged them to holy living. Now remember, this act probably took place before Moses received the law. And the prescription for the various sacrifices that were given to Moses have not been instituted yet. But we know that sacrifices took place from the beginning. How do we know that? Cain and Abel, right? Stories of Cain and Abel, Noah, later Abraham, all show that some knew the idea that their sin demanded propitiation. Their sin demanded a sacrifice. A sacrifice had to be offered, and that sacrifice became the object that had to die in order to appease the wrath of God. Listen to what Christopher Ash wrote in his commentary on this section, okay? It's a paragraph long, so stay with me. I thought it was really good. He says, they gather, and Job the patriarch, the family head, offers a burnt offering for each of them. Later in the history of Israel, burnt offering would be the most expensive form of sacrifice in which the whole sacrificial animal is consumed. It pictures the hot anger of God burning up the animal in the place of the worshiper, whose sins would have made them liable to be burned up in the presence of God. We can imagine Job doing this for them one at a time. This is for you. And he lights the fire, and the animal is consumed. And the son or daughter watches the Holocaust and thinks, that is what would have happened to me if there had not been a sacrifice. And then the next one, this one's for you. And so on until the children were covered by sacrifice. It seems as if when Job had his 10 children there, 7 sons and 3 daughters, that he would not just offer a sacrifice for the one on their birthday, but rather on that day he would assemble all 10 of his kids there and offer sacrifices for them. Parents, what can we learn from Job? What can we learn from Job? Well, obviously we don't do sacrifices anymore, do we? There's a once-for-all sacrifice. It's Jesus Christ. But what can we learn from Job? Well, first, we see that Job is very concerned about his children's hearts before God, not just their actions. Let's read what Job says here again at the end of verse 6. End of verse 5. Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God," where? In their hearts. Thus did Job continually. His children were not probably engaged in drunken, horrible parties. I don't think the parties were the problem. But though his children may have had outward piety, Job was concerned about the heart. He said, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Parents, is this a concern for you? You know, when my kids were younger, I think one failure I had as a dad is I was so focused on outward behavior. And I think we need to be on some levels, right? Stop throwing that at the person. Stop it. You know, we need to control behavior. But here's a problem that I think we as parents can really fall into. It all can become about controlling the outward behavior, and we're never addressing the heart. Job understood that. He's not just getting them to stop the behavior. He's saying, no, the problem with you is more than your behavior. It's a heart issue. We can have children who conform, but still curse God in their hearts. Job reminds us that our hearts are the problem. And as parents, we should primarily be concerned with the hearts of our children and not just outward conformity. Should we be concerned with outward conformity? Oh, yeah. However, we should be primarily concerned, it's not just about kids who fall into line and obey. We should be trying to cultivate in their hearts that fear of God. Now, is it true that our outward acts often reveal our hearts? Absolutely. As we see our kids doing sinful things, we should be keenly aware of the sin that is within. However, we should also know that a person can outwardly display a piety and yet hide a sinful heart. And I think Job understood this. I mean, I'll get to that in a second. Also, parents, obviously we don't provide sacrifices any longer. But why did Job send for all the kids? Look at verse 5 again. When the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. Why? Why would he send for all of them? See, when they came and they saw this spectacle, when they saw that these animals, whatever the sacrifices were being sacrificed for their sin, what do you think that did to them every year? Multiple times a year. What do you think that did? I heard someone talk. Don't you think it was a constant reminder, hey, we have sin that needs to be dealt with. Your relationship with God is of utmost importance. I think he wanted the reality that sin demands a punishment to be a reality to them. He wanted them to see that because they sinned, something had to die. He wanted them to know that their sin required a sacrifice. Parents, it's not just getting, let me back up. One of the best things I think we can do as parents is when our children are sinning, to not just get them to stop the action, but to get them to understand this is why Jesus came to die. That sin is why Jesus died. To save us from the judgment that we deserved. I think we as parents should really be committed to showing this to our children. Now, here's another thing too. How old were his children? Well, they had their own homes, right? Did Job stop investing in their life when they grew up? No, he continued, and I'm sure it didn't look the same. I'm sure it didn't look the same as they did when they were young, but Job did not at that point say, well, I did the best I could, you're out. Guess I'm done being a spiritual leader in your life. I do think that those relationships change. I do think that there are things that are different over the years, but he did not for once think that he lost a responsibility of being a spiritual mentor to his children. I think it's so important to us, for us to understand. So, anything else that stuck out to you as we went into this study of Job? Like I said, we're just starting, aren't we? But I do think Job is presented here as an ideal man. He's an example to us on many levels. Anything that stuck out to you tonight or any questions or just any comments at all? Yes, ma'am. So true. Tracy? Yeah, I had that thought too. If he was an orphan, and now the kind of dad he's become, I mean, we're stepping into the realm of speculation. But it's interesting to think about.
It's kind of cool to see that Satan realizes what's going on in our lives. I mean, he's counted the sheep apparently, and the goats and the camels and all that, the kids, the servants. You know, he knows what that's a sign of in Job's life. You know, but, you know, the New Testament, resist the devil, he will flee from you. I mean, there are reactions Satan has to our living a godly life. He is impacted by that. It's not just it's not walking around. He's watching. He is aware. To hear the name of God and shudder. To hear Christ's name and shudder. He is impacted by our walk. He is impacted by the power of Jesus Christ. He has to go around God. He can't go. He's not. Here God's doing all this good stuff, so I'm just going to plow through and mess them up.
Yeah.
All this is coming to God or Satan getting permission. He was removed from heaven. He wasn't. He just. I've had it around here. I think I'll take off on my own for a while. Here's a guy, asking for permission. So it seems like he's almost goading God into it a little bit, but he is totally aware of what God is doing in this man's life and what's going on.
Yeah. Anyone else? Perla? Yeah, we don't know, do we? Yeah, I mean, we don't know. Yeah, we know he had a fear of the Lord, right? Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, next week, maybe to whet your appetite a little bit, let's look at verse 6. I'm definitely not going to start in on this, but verse 6, as I said this last week, it's one of those verses that we literally could spend weeks and weeks in. We're going to talk about a little bit the sons of God. Who are the sons of God? There are a lot of thoughts there. And then the idea of Satan. Is this really a name? Or is this something that one of the sons of God, Satan means deceiver, adversary. And so we're going to jump into that a little bit. But we do see that the Lord is having this conversation with the adversary, with the deceiver. We see that this person, this being, I should say, is going to and fro on the earth, walking up and down. And then the Lord, look at verse 8. Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. That is verbatim almost what we read about Job in verse 1. And this is God giving this testimony about Job. And so when Job is laying there talking to his friends, and his friends are saying, Job, you're not blameless here. You must have done something wrong. And Job says, no, I am blameless. God himself has said Job is blameless. And do I think that the Lord blessed Job for his, for the way he lived? I do. But I think we need to be careful with that as well, because why was Job, why did he lose it all? Was it because all of a sudden he stopped being blameless and fearing God? No. So we need to be careful as we think through these things. So I'm trying to whet your appetite as we go, what this study is going to look like as we progress here, okay? It's going to challenge, I think, some preconceptions that we have. And I think one that is just fundamental is if I do A, B, C, D, and I live a certain way, things are just going to all pan out. Well, we'll see, won't we? Any other thoughts, comments before we pause for the evening? Yeah, Cheryl.
This book is a great map for us
Hmm.
because it just shows us that whatever trials we go through, no matter how tough, we must focus on the Lord
Hmm.
and give him honor and glory.
Yeah.
No matter and forget about what people think
Right.
about us.
Yeah.
We have to remember his words.
So true. So true. Well, let's do this. You have that sheet with you, and we have about 7 or so minutes.